Hey, thank you for watching the video. My name is Shane Hernandez, and we're going to be talking about corn gluten feed today. So what is corn gluten? Corn gluten is the byproduct of the corn milling process and is produced from wet corn milling. Wet corn milling plants will separate the oil and starch from corn to produce paper, sugar, food, beverages, among other products. During the milling process, corn is grinded down to the kernel and soaked in water with a weak acid to separate the kernel into starch, oil, and proteins. As the metabolites begin to separate, the kernel begins to swell. The swollen kernel goes through a second grinding process to separate the bran from the kernel. The mixture is then separated and filtered, removing the starch and oil while leaving the bran and soluble amino acids, peptides, minerals, and vitamins behind. The bran is then mixed back with these soluble components to form wet corn gluten feed. Wet corn gluten feed can then be dried into dry corn gluten feed, and dry corn gluten feed has a longer shelf life and is easier to handle, but wet corn gluten feed typically has nutritional advantages. So why is this important? We know wet corn milling plants will produce sugar, food, and beverages, which is pretty important, but they also will produce ethanol biofuel. And ethanol biofuel plants are the fastest growing segment in the fuel industry, producing almost 60% of ethanol fuel. And the more this industry grows, the more byproduct, the more waste is produced. Well, the livestock and ruminants in particular have been able to utilize this byproduct and turn it into a $32 billion export industry. And most importantly to the producer, this byproduct serves as a very important nutritional supplement. This graph covers the growth of corn gluten feed exports over the past 4 years. As you can see, within the last 2 years, there's been considerable growth and increased trade. And as we talked before, increased growth just means increased byproduct. So why feed corn gluten feed? Well, it's this highly dense source of protein and fibers. We remove the starch and the oils, and so we don't have as big of an issue with acidosis as we do with feeding pure corn or high moisture corn. In fact, protein concentrations are almost double that of regular corn, and NDF concentrations are 4 to 5 times greater than corn. The protein within corn gluten is highly digestible and more soluble than soybean meal. In a ruminal study measuring endogenous nitrogen flow, non-ammonia nitrogen found in the duodenum was lower in diets that included corn gluten. Additionally, protein escaping fermentation varied between 14 to 26%. A study suggests that utilizing corn gluten feed as a supplement in diets may increase protein digestibility and utilization. The increased digestibility may be an effect of the small particle size, leading to greater surface area for the fermentation. If ruminal liquid dilution rate is high, bacteria may have less time to ferment feed sources, but the smaller particles may be degraded before they wash out of the rumen. And a similar effect was observed where steers were fed chopped hay versus ground hay, where ground hay was observed to have lower non-ammonia nitrogen in the duodenum. A major concern when feeding grain-based diets is acidosis, a major cause for morbidity in young cattle. Corn gluten feed's low starch value enables producers to provide a high-quality protein source while limiting changes in pH. Studies observe an increase in propionate butyrate concentrations while limiting negative changes in ruminal pH and acetate concentrations. Now, corn gluten feed does not prevent acidosis, but it may reduce the length in which an animal may be in the state of acidosis. Grain-fed diets tend to reduce the effectiveness of fiber degraders, promoting the growth of starch degraders. Corn gluten feed has a high level of non-detergent fiber and low starch values, which, in addition to limiting acidosis, increases fiber digestibility. Increased neutral detergent fiber has been linked with increase in both lactation and daily average gain. So this is just another story about the ruminant microbes being able to utilize an untapped resource and convert it into energy, right? Right, yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, there are some downsides to corn gluten feed. And the downside is the nutritional composition variability. If you look at a nutritional composition table, you'll see values listed for protein and NDF and ether and protein availability, but unfortunately, those are just averages. Protein values can vary between 17 and 26%, NDF between 26 to 54%, ether extract from 1 to 7%, and that's across the board. And these reports are just reported values. There haven't been any studies done to actually measure the true variability of corn gluten feed. And this makes it very difficult for nutritionists and producers to build a diet around corn gluten feed. Now we discussed the extreme variability in corn gluten feed, and there are many factors that influence the production of corn gluten feed that will produce the variability that we observe. Factors that include the diets that are fed along with corn gluten feed, the process of drying it from wet to dry corn gluten feed. There's a reaction called the Maillard's reaction, which will actually make protein indigestible. The quality and quantity of extract added back into corn gluten feed will obviously change the nutritional composition, and the price of the individual extract components will also rise and fall. And millers will either isolate them and sell them on their own, or add more in to get it out of their plant. Corn byproducts currently face an uncertain future. Wet mills represent the largest energy consumer of the industry, costing $20 to $30 million a year. Exports are endangered as the EU considers a corn gluten ban, and it is important to remember the producers' needs as the industry begins to look domestically for sustainable outlets for its byproduct. The variability in corn gluten feed needs to be better measured in order to provide producers with more accurate nutritional recommendations. While several studies have reported variance during their experiments, research on the true variance of corn gluten is limited. I suggest a regional investigation to serve as a basis for a more in-depth look into current production methods and to highlight more consistent sources of corn gluten feed. These are my references that I've sourced all of this information from. Thank you to them. And thank you to you. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed it.